He says a lot of things which are clearly for effect. He's a great actor. So a lot of the things that he says are dramatic and meant just for the moment, I think. He's a showman, an unashamed and very successful showman, and people love it. But if you are brought up in a village, in a well, and you're a frog in a well, then you would look at any kind of comparison with the outside world as insulting.
Does this, in your eyes, represent an antipathy for Muslims? Does it suggest an antipathy for Muslims on the Prime Minister's part?
Well, see, certainly it suggests that he looks on them as outsiders, as not sons of the soil, as not belonging here, not what in Malaysia they call bhumiputras. He is appealing to voters at their lowest common denominator. And it's an unabashed appeal to instinct, to gut instinct.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. What should we make of some of the bizarre, perhaps even inexplicable things that the Prime Minister has been saying in his speeches? That's the key issue I shall raise today with one of our more astute commentators, the former editor of The Statesman, Sunanda Datta-Ray. Mr. Datta-Ray, what is perhaps the most bizarre comment made by the Prime Minister in his speeches, and certainly the most inexplicable, is his claim that Rahul Gandhi and Congress have received tempo loads of black money and what he called chori ka mal from Adani and Ambani. What was your response when you found out that this is what the Prime Minister has said?
I wondered why he had said it and what relevance it had to the voting pattern of the elections on. Everything is tailored to the elections. Nothing is said that is completely irrelevant to the voting. And I wondered, since it's on a party basis, what Mr. Modi hoped to reap from a comment like that.
Now, it's not just Rahul Gandhi that this comment attacks. It also accuses Adani and Ambani, two of the biggest industrialists in the country by name, of possessing and purveying black money and what was called chori ka mal. Such allegations made by the Prime Minister of India surely need to be inquired into both by the Election Commission, but also, I would imagine, by the Enforcement Directorate and the CBI. Would you agree that he's actually inviting an inquiry against the two industrialists?
Well, the enigma is that until that comment of the Prime Minister's, and I think he followed it up by saying was the money taken in autos or scooters or rickshaws. Until that comment, the public perception, and perception is what matters most in elections, was that these two gentlemen were closely allied to the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party. And why had the Prime Minister suddenly decided to cast them as supporters of the Congress? I don't know.
But it's not just as supporters of Congress that he's cast them. He's also cast them as possessors and purveyors of black money and chori ka mal. Surely that requires an inquiry.
I won't disagree with you, but if that calls for an inquiry, then I should imagine most of India's businessmen and tycoons and industrialists would be fit subject for inquiry.
Except that most industrialists are not named in public by the Prime Minister. In this instance, the two biggest in the country were named by the Prime Minister in public. And as you said, these are people who most people have thought were close to him. Now he's publicly naming them as purveyors of black money, as possessors of chori ka mal, which will be sent by tempo loads to Congress.
So it's for them really to take action. I mean, they are being accused of hoarding black money and aspersions cast on their operational methods. It's for them to take action against the prime minister legally in the courts. Presumably, there is a mechanism for ensuring justice in this country still working. Why don't they do it?
Does honor demand that they should take action against the prime minister to clear their name and to remove the stain on their reputation that he's quite clearly placed?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And to set the public mind at rest.
Tell me something. Do you think the prime minister intended everything that he said? Or could this possibly be an uncharacteristic lapse of judgment on his part?
I can't say that I have the prime minister taped so accurately. I am not an avid follower of his every statement. He says a lot of things which are clearly for effect. He's a great actor. So a lot of the things that he says are dramatic and meant just for the moment, I think.
And you think this is one of those dramatic statements meant just for the moment? In other words, he was simply speaking because this had come into his head. It wasn't a big further point that he was making.
I wouldn't know. But he does seem to place, just as visually he presents such a flamboyant appearance. He's different from in each meeting, a different turban, different scarves, different jahar coats. I mustn't call them jahar coats, though, must I? A different kurta. It's so much of what he says and does and how he says and does it is for effect. He's a showman, an unashamed and very successful showman, and the people love it.
Let's come to a second strange comment made by the Prime Minister. This time, it was in connection with Sam Pitroda's remarks to your old paper, The Statesman, about how South Indians resemble Africans. The Prime Minister said, and I'm quoting him exactly, "Itni badi gaali di hai." This is such a big insult. Is it an insult to be compared to or called African? And how will that go down in Africa, where we claim to be leaders of the global South?
Well, I didn't think Pitroda's remark was all that extraordinary. He was focusing on India's demographic variety. And it's something we are proud of, unity in diversity. Our people have come from different parts of the world. They look different, they eat differently, their languages have different origins. The Ahoms in Assam came from Laos. The people of the northwest frontier, no longer in India, alas, but people from that region came from Central Asia. So these strands have gone into the making of India's civilization. And I don't see why the Prime Minister took such umbrage at it, unless he was just looking. He was spoiling for a fight and he was looking for insults.
The truth,
in a way, it could be a compliment to India, surely, that we have this diversity, have this variety, and all these races and cultures have merged into the melting pot of India.
As you said, the Prime Minister clearly took umbrage at what Sam Pitroda has said. And the Prime Minister's exact words were, "Itni badi gaali di hai." And I want to ask you, is it an insult to the people of India to compare them to or call them African? Is it an insult to do that?
Well, Sam Pitroda wasn't comparing them to anyone. He was saying they were similar. He wasn't. And I don't see that as an insult at all.
In which case,
if someone has a vision of the global community and sees all the different physiognomies in it and hears the language of it, then it wouldn't see it as an insult. But if you are brought up in a village, in a well, and you're a frog in a well, then you would look at any kind of comparison with the outside world as insulting.
Let me ask you this. Does the Prime Minister's comment that this is a badi gaali, a big insult, suggest that he is color conscious? That perhaps he's racist in his attitude to Africans, which is why he sees it as an insult when South Indians are said to be similar to Africans?
Well, that could be one construction. Maybe he is so unused to such comparisons that he regards it as an insult. A civilized man of the world like Pitroda lived half his life in the United States. He would be much more used to the different kinds of races and languages and eating habits and wouldn't regard it as an insult.
But as you said, the Prime Minister's response is similar to that of a frog in a well who has no idea of the outside world.
Right. And he is also, bearing in mind, he is also speaking probably to other frogs in wells or frogs in a giant well who are sort of think on similar lines and who would also regard as an insult.
Let's come to what the Prime Minister has said about Indian Muslims. He first called them people who have more children than us. He then called them infiltrators. Is it acceptable for an Indian Prime Minister to speak of his fellow citizens in this way?
It is most inappropriate for any Indian to single out one group of Indians and fasten on their habits, on any aspect of the habits, as being different and say, and hold that difference up as the mark of their identity, as the marker of their identity, and say, to that extent, that they eat this, or they speak this way, or they dress this way, they are different from us, and therefore they are not Indian. That's highly inappropriate.
What about calling them infiltrators?
Infiltrated from where and when?
He
You
didn't
should be
say.
asked to examine those and elucidate.
But when he called them infiltrators, he wasn't talking about people who were illegal immigrants from, for example, Bangladesh. He was talking about Indian Muslims per se as a whole. When you call your fellow citizens, 14.3% of the population, perhaps as much as 200 million in size, infiltrators, what does that suggest of the Prime Minister? This is, after all, a secular country, and yet here is the Prime Minister calling his own brothers and sisters, his own fellow citizens, infiltrators.
Well, it's not the first time that the Prime Minister has cast that particular aspersion. When he talked of 1200 saal ke gulami, I wondered when his 1200 saal began and who were the first people to impose gulami on India. There is a certain cut-off date in his mind that from until this date, we were genuine Indians, and after this date, we have ceased to be Indians. I imagined, possibly in my naivety, that I initially imagined that he meant the beginning of British rule, because that's when India underwent a tremendous transformation from a hodgepodge of medieval satrapies emerged into a modern nation under the civilizing influence of British rule. But no, he doesn't mean that. He means 1200 years earlier, something happened. So he's never actually explicitly said what happened, what was the watershed, when the Gulami began. But obviously, in his mind, it's a terrible, festering kind of sore.
Does this, in your eyes, represent an antipathy for Muslims? Does it suggest an antipathy for Muslims on the Prime Minister's part?
Well, see, certainly it suggests that he looks on them as outsiders, as not sons of the soil, as not belonging here, not what in Malaysia they call bhumiputras.
Tell me something. For the last 3 weeks, often 2 to 3 times a day, The Prime Minister has also claimed that reservations meant for OBCs, SCs, and STs will be snatched from them and handed over to Muslims. In other words, Muslims will benefit at the cost of Hindus. He's then specifically said that women's Mangal Sutras will be stolen from them and half your inheritance will be given to Muslims. And that surely is an attempt to demonize Muslims in Hindu eyes. Do you view this as hate speech, or is that an exaggerated interpretation?
But I don't know what the precise definition of a hate speech is. But the BJP's response to Muslims and attitudes to Muslims has bewildered me for a long time. I've tried to seek elucidation from BJP members, activists, and failed. I have my family background is in East Bengal, what is now Bangladesh. I had never lived there, but since the family comes from there, I have absorbed the culture of East Bengal. And in East Bengal, there was a Muslim majority, but in a relatively humble station in society. And I am well aware that Hindus looked on Muslims there with considerable reservation. And I've asked, but that was a kind of cultural and social reservation. They were unclean. That was the view. They were economically worse off and dependent on Hindus, and that might have colored views. Now, I've asked BJP people, do you look on Muslims in the same way as being unclean? Oh, no, they've said. No, they are just like any other Indians. But then what is it? The implication I get is that they're not trusted. They're regarded as anti-national in some way. Never clearly explain what. That they are constantly being appeased. The response to some of my articles has been that they are being appeased. I don't understand it. There is a deep complex in the Hindu mind, as expressed through the BJP's policies and rhetoric, complex about Muslims, and that surfaces every so often. Now, that could be one reason. Modi himself is part of that hoi polloi. A second reason could be he is an astute operator. He knows that this is the chord that I must tap if I want to win the applause of the multitude. And so he cynically, unabashedly plonks on that.
What you're saying is that Modi is deliberately running down Muslims to try and win Hindu support. He's creating a polarization between Hindus and Muslims in the belief that this will unite Hindu votes behind him.
You're sort of fitting it into contemporary political slogans. I would say that he is pandering to the instinct of the majority of Indians, the majority being Hindus and majority suffering from this complex about Muslims. He is pandering to their instinct to identify with them.
The Prime Minister has also claimed that the Congress party intends to give priority to minorities in sport, and therefore, as he put it, it will decide on the basis of religion who will be in the cricket team. Given India's obsession with cricket, is that even feasible or conceivable? Or do you think this is just a wild charge?
What is feasible?
Deciding membership of the Indian cricket team on the basis of religion. In other words, Congress will fill the Indian cricket team with Muslims in place of Hindus. That's the implication of what the PM is saying.
Why would Congress do that? To deliberately, so that India loses?
No, to pander, as you said, to the Muslims who he believes are Congress's vote bank.
Well, this is part of the same syndrome, really. And I first came across it, believe it or not, not in India, but in Israel, as long ago as 1969 or 70. A very senior member of the Israeli government asked me to lunch, and in the course of lunch, in those days, India had no relations with Israel, if you remember, and I had to get a separate passport in London to travel to Israel, which was valid for only 6 months, and which I still have. Now, we were discussing whether India would get round to establishing diplomatic relations with Israel. And this Israeli diplomat said, the United Nations has got nothing to do with it. India might say that they're concerned about the support of the Arab members of the UN. That's absolute rubbish. India cares as little for the UN as we Israelis do. But the Congress party depends on office or depends on the Muslim vote for being in office. And he said that, and it has since been repeated ad infinitum by the non-Congress parties, that the Congress is dependent on Muslims. And you hear wild exaggerations of this, that the Nehrus were really Muslims, that Manishankar Ayar said something the other day about
Pakistan.
Was it that we must not alienate Pakistan because it's
Quite right.
a hostile country and it has a nuclear bomb. And Manishankar Ayar saying that didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was the haste with which the Congress establishment distanced itself from Manishankar Ayar's views. It didn't want to give Modi any chance, any loophole to be able to accuse the Congress of appeasing Muslims and Pakistan.
So all of this in your eyes is an example of Modi's antipathy, what you call the fact that he looks upon Muslims as outsiders, as people who don't belong to India. All of this is an example of that.
An example?
That's right, an illustration from Modi's.
I can't think of an illustration, but he's constantly saying it in various ways and accusing any kind of support, expression of support for Muslims as support for anti-national elements.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Finally, Mr. Datta-Ray, what do you make of the way the Prime Minister has delivered these comments? I'm no longer talking about the content, I'm talking of the delivery and the style. Is this eloquence and oratory, or was he hamming it up, what in Hindi is often called nautanki?
He is appealing to voters at their lowest common denominator. And it's an unabashed appeal to instinct, to gut instinct. Like that reference to Mangal Sutras being snatched away. Now, what your mother or your sister or your wife's Mangal Sutra will be snatched away to give gold to Muslims. What could be more emotive than that?
My last question. India has been an independent country with sovereign prime ministers for nearly 77 years. Do you recall earlier prime ministers making such speeches attacking Muslims, casting aspersions on top industrialists who are named specifically, and objecting to being called similar to Africans? Have earlier prime ministers made similar sort of speeches ever?
No. I don't need to elaborate that. No, no one else has. They've looked on India's diversity as an asset.
So this is a low point in prime ministerial speeches.
It's certainly a very different strategy for a prime minister, for someone who claims to rule by the verdict of Indians of all hues. Yes, it's certainly a low point, if you like, a different approach to politics.
Mr. Datta-Ray, thank you very much for making time for me. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.